So I'll just get my mind around the reassembly of the cross slide, the dovetail slide and the cross slide. With respect to the gibs, now I had in an earlier video already built this up and checked that the direction of cross slide travel was within the tolerance, so it actually turns slightly concave by it's something like half a thou. I can't recall offhand. It doesn't matter at this stage. The faces that I've actually scraped to date are that one, that one, that one and that one, and they're mating faces on the saddle. What I haven't touched are the inclined faces, and the reason for doing that way was to basically maintain that alignment, or the alignment that was in there. So I know that having dropped the thing, the gibs are going to need adjusting. Now if we take the top one, you've got a trapezoidal shape, so that's your bearing face, and then that's the wedging face. So the wedging face hasn't been touched, but at some stage we'll re-scrape this face and its mating face for bearing contact. Now the way these things are set up is, I'll just show you on the top, there's a little set screws that set the height at which this gib is pulled up by the cap heads into the threaded hole. Yeah, so that's your adjustment for getting the feel of that in terms of how loose it is or tight it is as you're working. So that one I can cope with. This one, same kind of shape gib, and you access the clamping bolts from the top, and you nip them up. Now nipped up, because I've taken material off that face and that face, for all intents and purposes it drops that unit down, which means that this has then got a gap. So where it was fitted, there's a few thou of a gap now. So where that thing nipped up, it's seated on its bottom face there, so there's no adjustment in it. So it's the only way I can see of adjusting it is I've got to take material off the bottom of that gib, fit it, check for clearance, and keep doing that as I'm going along. Now what I haven't got is any kind of guideline as to what kind of fit it would have had originally, but I'm guessing a lot less than that. It wants to be a reasonable slide, because it's that assembly which is pulled across and backwards by the taper turning attachment, that moving the whole cross slide across. So there's a new one on me. I've not re-blued anything just to check, but when I left this rough scraped, I'd got good contact over all of the bearing faces. I've since that's been sat on there and it's had a tickle up. I've then hung the saddle under apron on it, so there might be some kind of movement on that face which I've now got to account for. So first job is to blue up the saddle and then fit it, just sit it back on and make sure that these two main contact faces are thus contact. Now I have been doing the whole face all the way along, reason being I printed it first off the granite plate. Now when you consider that it's only actually moving from there to there, I think it's about 4 inches of movement. So I could get away with just hollowing out the mid sections now. Anyway, enough of me babbling on. I'll go and find my blue ink. Well, thankfully nothing's shifted. It's a little bit light, this bottom edge, which is the rear corner, which is how it was when I scraped it. Good coverage all the way along there, and the same along that side. So I'm happy. That's for what it's doing, that's fine. And bear in mind, it's only ever moving slow, and it's only ever moving over the 12 inch, was it 12 or 14 inch length of that. But the actual movement of the slide, I think it's only what have we got, 3 inches. It's not a lot, is it? So that's that bit done. Next bit's to check the dovetail, which I suspect is going to be out. It's not a great print, but it is in contact across its pretty much full width of it. So I'm going to scrape that for bearing. What I'm basically saying is the angle of the dovetail in relation to the flats seems to be fairly consistent with what we've got. So I'll scrape that. It's definitely been relieved to an extent for about the middle third, so that there's roughly 3.5 inches at each end, so it's always in contact. So we'll do a bit of tickling up and see how that looks. Right, well, I'm now fitting the key, the gib strip. It's been a bit of a learning curve, but basically I've hand filed clear material off the bottom of it so the whole thing drops down, and then each time I've taken some off, I've put everything together and then checked the side to side movement, the clearance. Started off at 12th thou at this end and 7th thou at the far end, and I'm down now to 1.5 thou at this end and 1/2 thou to 3/4 thou at that end. So having got it something like, what I'm now doing is scraping the bottom of the key to give us a better seat, so that I've got a repeatable stop when it goes down. Then once that's done, I'll scrape that face, which is the bearing face, A for fit and B for oil retention. It's probably not the right sequence of operations, but I'm kind of limited because, for the simple fact of the way it goes together. If I don't have it sat down far enough, it's down to twiddling the bloody screws up and down to give you the feel, so you can then scrape the bearing face. But if you can't do that without it being seated, so yeah, I can't think of a better way of doing it, so this is the way it's going. It's just a bit tedious. Didn't take much. I think I took about 1/6 thou off the thickness. Yeah, right, enough of me waffling on. It's Sunday night, I've had enough. I'm going in for a beer and a sausage for tea. I'm just fitting the gib for this taper turning slide. God, getting words out today's a struggle. And this is the first time I've done it with 4 screws in, so it's tight. I'll bring you out and show you. You see the screws. So they're literally just a 2-finger job on the screwdriver, and then I'm printing up that face. So we'll whip the screws out and we'll see what we got. Sorry for the slightly dodgy camera work, but it's not the easiest of things to film. And this bit is a pain because the gib kind of gets hung up, and then you flip it over and all the nuts drop out. And then the gib, it's messy to say the least. I haven't come up with a cunning plan yet, so. But I'm currently playing search for the Philister screws, these things. So you can see, picking up on each end, it's got a massive area of relief in the middle, which is over a third of it, and that's relieved by about 20 thou. So I just want to try and get contact over at least 2/3 of each of these pads. That's the plan. And when I'm putting it in, I'm just lifting the gib so it's not sliding on the print face. Gives me less smearing. There wasn't any difference between doing 2 screws versus 4, so I'm just going to carry on with 2 because it's less things to find when they drop on the floor and go ping. That's why I wanted to get the gib seated nicely. Bloody hell. Right, so you can see still a bit on the end there, and the same on the other end. So round and round we go on the cycle. I've showed this before when I was roughing in the cross slide, but for the sake of completeness, because the surfaces on the lower dovetail are smaller, in so much as the 2 pads giving the alignment at each end, I'm checking the alignment now for the cross slide, because it's a lot easier to adjust the bottom dovetails than it is re-scrape the whole of the dovetail across on the top side. So the way we do it, we got a large engineer's square, the blade running, and we set up a DTI on the carriage, running on the blade, and we know that this set square is good because we've already checked it. So once we've got the DTI running parallel this way, we can then set up another DTI on the cross slide and move it across backwards and forwards against the stock. We're looking for just under half a thou over 12 inches, which is what, 0.015 I think it is millimeters over 300 mil. So I've got it parallel now that way. I'm musing on whether I want to clamp it down, because if I clamp it, it can't move when I'm moving the DTI around, and from memory things tend to become a bit mobile. So yeah, I've only got a limited amount of travel, not least because the longer you have that extended, the more variation you're going to get. But it's showing 0 movement between there and there, which is what, 6 inches. Right, I'll set the next DTI up. So the second part of it is obviously the DTI running along the stock, 0 here, and as it traverses him, if you translate this, the tolerance for tool room lathe would be 6/10 thousandths over 12 inches. So over 6 inches, that's going to give you 3/10 thousandths. Unfortunately, I have 3 thousandths. Got a bit of adjustment to do. Bugger. I'll sit and scratch my head a bit and decide what the best approach is going to be. Picking up from last night's findings, where the cross slide is pointing over, I think 6 thou, and it needs to be under, well, around about 3/4 of a thou. And having a chat with my pal down south, cheers Duncan. As this thing wears, it's going to wear to produce a more concave cut. So obviously, I can't believe it wasn't originally supplied with that much feed in, so it's worn to it. Because as I say, I haven't actually adjusted these dovetail slides yet. So first things first, I've looked at the options for how to re-scrape that, and at the moment all I've done is basically just improve the contact bearing between the moving part and the fixed part, and that's giving us the misalignment. So I know that I've got to bring that back into true, and the same on the other one. I've got two issues with it. One is that the included angle there is 50 degrees, and all of my dovetail straight edges are 55, so they don't fit. So there's two options. I scrape that out to make it 55 and then just use that, or I machine this face off to bring it down to something like 48 degrees so I can get in there, lift it, print it and drop it. Second thing is I can't use a straight edge in there whilst it's mounted on the lathe, so I've got to take this off anyway, because that's in the way, which is the feed gear for the cross slide screw. All I can think of is that I'd got my head up my rear end and fitted it without thinking about those dovetails. I wasn't expecting that degree of wear there. There's then the top face of it. Now the problem, I'm just going to bring the top of the slide into the picture. Now when I have, let's just shuffle that along a little bit. When I've put a pair of pins either side of this and measured the width going down, bearing in mind I've scraped that horizontal face and that horizontal face, top and bottom. The width I've got is 953, 953, 955 and 964. So you got what, best part of 9 thou variation down there. So it's showing wear. Now if I want to shift that alignment that way, I've got to take material off this end, and this is already the narrow end. That's what I'm finding slightly concerning, because I can't quite get my head round how that wear's happened. But what I think has happened is the wear on the underside of these flats, and there was quite excessive in that area, and well, tapered back that way. As I've taken the thing down on the underside and then done the same on the top side, as that's gone down to bring it back to flat, it's obviously increased the gap, which would allow the pins to shuffle in a bit. So it's not actually wear on the dovetail, it's that face which has been dropped. So it has adjusted the geometry of it a degree, more than I'd anticipated. So a very big learning exercise. Anyway, enough of me babbling on. I now need to work out a way that I can modify this straight edge, scrape that back and then scrape the bottom to it, and then check the alignment again, because I think the majority of the adjustments is going to have to be on this, which then raises issues about the alignment of the screw through here, making sure that that's not canted over or one way or the other, because it will cause binding on it. So yeah, bit of head scratching to go on, and I'll bring you back when I have a cunning plan. So I'm just setting up to machine off this tapered edge so that it gives me, I can get a 50 degree dovetail print. This is where my lack of experience causes me much consternation. Long and the short of it, that would be a great setup, because my shaper's only a 14-inch shaper,
and the bar's 20.5 inches. If I shove the ram all the way back and cut the first 14 inches and then shove the ram all the way forward, I can cut up to 18.5 inches, which is obviously still short. So and I can't physically get the thing any closer unless I put it at this position. So that way I could then push the whole of the straight edge down underneath the ram. You see, a bit of clearance down there. It also has the added advantage that I could use the auto indexing to step it across. So again, just cut the first 14.5 inches and shove it in and cut the last bit. The problem is I can't think of a way clamping it down, because there's just not a lot of clearance. I can't see a way of clamping this near edge down. So I am going to have to do a bit of cocking about and basically sit it flat. And then I think, because I can't get the end of the straight edge in any further doing it this way round, it's too tall to go under the gap there, so I'd have to cut the first 14 inches with the head canted over, which has got the advantage of it gives me the accurate I want to do 47 degrees. 45 would be okay, but I'm breaking into these two holes, which I'm trying to avoid because it'll leave me a weak section here. Anyway, I canted over at 47 degrees and cut the first sort of 14 inches. And then I think what I'm going to have to do is flip the thing around, reclock it in, tip the head the other way because it obviously be sided, I think, and then cut it again. Yeah. Of course, if I had an 18.5 inch shaper, I'd just run it through that, or better still 24, but no, we've got what we've got. So that's about 2 hours worth of cocking about trying to come up with a solution. Well, after much cocking about, I put the vice back on and come up with a way of doing this. It's snug. You're looking at the clearance between the bottom of the ram here and the top of the vice. That's the tool through its full stroke there. So we've got clearance around the tool, clearance under between the part and the underside of the ram, and clearance between the ram and the vice. What it means I can do is cut the first 14 inches down, undo the vice, push the part that way, and cut the last 6 or 8 inches. It's not going to be as accurate as cutting it all in one pass, but I've got to scrape it anyway, so beats scraping off 1/4 of an inch. Well, as predicted, we've broken into the hole there, but that's the first length machined. Now we're just going to clean up that bit. I'm going to leave that slightly proud, a thou or two, because it's a lot easier to scrape a thou off that than go underneath and then have to scrape a thou off all of that lot. Bring you back in a bit. And you see the U section inside, that's the end of the yoke. The workpiece was fitting just inside that, and I got about 10 thou of clearance all round it. That's when the yoke was at its forward extreme, which meant that advancing the cutter, hang on, just mess my camera. Advancing the cutter was a case of undoing that and tapping the cutter down each time, because that's the feed. Everything else had to be locked up because the yoke was basically preventing movement left and right, which was irrelevant anyway. So we've rough machined it. That's where the first stroke finished. You just see a witness mark, and I can feel it. And I got down to this point, everything was blending in lovely, but basically the cut was getting too deep. It was getting to the full depth of the cut, so I had to stop, back the tool out, take a swipe over that lot, and then bring it back in, touch off and finish off. So I've got a bit of a discrepancy here. Not entirely sure what's caused it. I dare say all will become apparent when I do the first print, but it's took the main of the material off. The casting itself is thicker at that end than it is at this end, so yeah, it was, I think it was a case of somebody's had the casting, rough machined it, used it for the job, and then away it went. Anyway, I've had enough. I'm going to go in and have my tea. That'll do. Righty, so we're setting up to rescrape this dovetail straight edge. I've got it blocked up on a pair of V-blocks, nothing fancy, and they're set roughly at thirds in on the ends. They're slightly wider. Block at the backs just to stop everything migrating across the table as I'm moving. I might need to do some more chocks either end. The straight edge I'm using is an old one I've scraped up against the granite stone. It's actually the same size, so it's as close as I could get. It does save humping about my that's a 3 foot and I've got a 2 foot version, and it's a bit heavy humping it about, so that will give me a perfectly good reference. So yeah, I've got to spread the ink on the new straight edge face, and away we go. So I was roughing it in at the moment. Basically I got a bit of a hump here, which is the end of this first stroke and the start of the second one, and then a gouge. This section here is a hell of a lot tougher than the rest, so all I'm doing is stroking a file off it to bring it down, and once I've got an even finish all the way along, then I'll start doing proper printing. If my machining capabilities and skill were a bit better, I probably would end up with having to do this. My thoughts are scrape this one first, which is what the top slide, sorry, the cross slide is lined up on. Just rough it in so that I've got not too bothered about bearing contact, just a nice straight surface. Then put it back together, recheck the angle. Now remember, at the moment we're 1/6 thou that way, and we want to be about 1/2 thou. So that one will be where most of the material comes out from. That's my thoughts. So in order to send it from there to there, I've got to take material out that end, or material which is off this, or material off the sliding part on this end. One of the considerations, let's move my straight edge. One of the considerations is because the cross slide runs through here, the screw and the nut running up and down there. If I start hacking away at this slide to get me that alignment, it's going to throw the feed screw out of alignment, which on a worn screw and nut isn't a problem, but I've actually got halfway through making a replacement screw, so I want to try and keep that position good. So yeah, enough of waffling on. Get that humped out and start looking at doing this face. Right, so we've got the cross slide. It's sat up against the board, so it can't go that way. It's blocked each end, so it can't go left and right. And there's a batten screwed through the nut hole into that, and it's not cranked up too tight. I might actually just ease it back a touch. Reason being, you want the thing sat under its own weight and not bent in a vice or anything like that. I've just put the straight edge down. Right, so we've rebuilt it back up. I've verified that had moved, and I've moved it back to where it was. It only takes a very slight knock, despite having a couple of G-clamps just clamping it to the bed lightly. Anyway, if I go from a 0 position of here to a 0 position of there, which is 9 inches of travel, I've got 3 thou of movement. So if you added another, what, 25% to that, you're talking about another, say, 4 thou. So that, the lower section of the dovetails on this now need to go over somewhere in the region of 3.5 thou. So we'll start doing that. So we're scraping. Righty, so having established a datum, i.e. a side that's true, and sort of evened out the other side to get me a reasonable print, what I'm finding is that the mating faces with this one, the far end of it is 2 thou wider than the near end. So if you like, that end of it is 2 thou wider. Now the cutting force is, when it's running, is pushing the near side away. So I'm suspecting that the wear has basically been on that face under here, being pushed away there. Anyway, enough waffling. So I've got a 2 thou taper, and I know that I'm around about now 2.5 thou too much that way. So if I take the taper out, that'll bring us back to spec. That's the cunning plan. I've just got to decide which side I'm going to level out, whether I'm going to take it off the fixed side or the gib side. I don't think it makes a huge deal of difference, but actually yes it does. I'll have to take it out the fixed side to throw it over. Right, so making it up as I go along, and there we go.